Morning all, let's have a look at the candidates round 4. The first game to check out, let's check out Aronian versus Svidler. So Aronian kicked off with d4 and we saw a queen's gambit accepted. Knight f3 from Levon. After a6 now e3. Black's for the moment holding on to the pawn. It's undermined now with a4. Bishop b7 which holds the rook against ab. b3 trying to still undermine Black's pawn chain. Now Svidler played e6. Okay, so Black is ending up with a grip on these light squares. So White's regaining the pawn now after takes. Black doesn't try, for example, b4. He just simply takes on c4. Okay, and after bishop takes c4, knight f6. Black has that grip on some key central squares. It seems solid enough. A loose piece though on b7, can that be exploited in some way, or the b file? We see knight bd2, knight bd7. Okay, rook b1, rook b8. Now castling, bishop e7. And there is another vulnerability, this a6 pawn that's attacked now with queen e2. And Black actually just castles here. And with this pawn attacked, actually that's just left for a moment with bishop b2, trying to avoid an exchange of rooks. So still asking Black, what does he want to do about this pawn? And there's a very energetic response from Black, just still offering the pawn c5. So what's going on here? Well, Levon takes that pawn. Okay, pawn up for a moment. Rook a8. Now, if White tries queen c4, well, maybe knight b6, attacking queen and a4. So he's actually limited if he wants to hold on to the pawn for a moment. Okay, he plays queen b5, and now we see rook a5, which actually prepares a fast doubling against a4 potentially. So queen b3, queen a8. Okay, White for a moment tries to hold on again with rook a1, and now rook b8. Black's getting a lot of pressure. Queen c2 now taking on d4. Ed looks as though that's pretty bad for the light squares here. Blocked in bishop. Black's got that huge knight d5, it seems, if ed. It seems a very powerful blockade square here. So we see knight takes d4, symmetrical pawn structure on this side of the board, and it's only White's extra pawn which is the difference now. Rook c8, queen b1, and now this is taken. So we do have the dreaded symmetrical pawn structure, I'm afraid. And this means the likelihood of a draw is gone up dramatically now. Rook c1, queen a6. Well, as a general rule, because there isn't too much going on piecewise here. In fact, there's an exchange of rooks, a peaceful exchange of rooks. h3, a useful move, securing the back row a little bit. Black returns the compliment with h6. Queen c2, offering the exchange of queens, very peaceful. Knight d5, and now an exchange of bishops. Okay, not the most exciting end to the game. And I don't know if they're mimicking an earlier Carlsen draw in the tournament, but they placed their pieces symmetrically as though, yes, please can we have a draw now? And king f8, king f1. Okay, draw at move 31. Okay, not the most exciting game. I think in the post-game interview, I think there was it was indicated it was very difficult for White to hold on to that a pawn. Just a brief overview and summary though. So it seems that the queen's gambit accepted though is a viable opening of choice, of course, to equalise against one of the highest rated players in the world here. It's quite a good achievement for Peter to do this with Black, and he was quite pleased with it. That in this position after takes. B takes c4. Just a quick reference check here. My interest is slightly on b4. I guess white's got a bigger centre. B takes c4, 34 games I've got in reference. b4 only 5. So this is actually the most common move according to my reference database. And we have Chaikev, Kenkin, Sakev as exponents of this. Okay, so we have this position where black's two main liabilities at the moment, because white has the pressure at b7 and a6. If white immediately tries, I don't think queen b3 is particularly hot. It's been tried before 5 times. Okay, castling 15. Queen, knight d2 once before. Knight c3 6 times before. The most popular move here is castling, actually. Back row, Schulman, Lamy have all castled here. So knight d2, and yeah, it seems as though if white's plan is just to win that pawn here, but he's basically exposing the a pawn in the process, and the queen is can be kicked with tempo here as it is, then we're ending up basically with asymmetrical pawn structure. And I was joking in the comments of a previous video saying, what if they try to ban symmetrical pawn structures? But you can't do that. It's technically impossible. I think we did have a bloodthirsty round in round 3 anyway, the earlier round. Incredible that 3 of the 4 games were won. So we can't expect really attacking games every time. But yeah, it's evident that because of the nature of this tournament, people are going generally for a win. It's just that this game was quite peaceful. Okay, so let's go on to the next game. So now this, I think, is the game of the round, so be prepared to be enthralled, excited. Magnus Carlsen playing white against Grischuk. So e4 from Magnus. We see e5, Aronian Lopez, knight f6, but now d3, which is less theoretical, I think, still than other alternatives here, especially avoiding simplifications and trying to win black's queen, etc., that sort of stuff. Just d3, but this allows this bishop c5, and it seems this bishop's potentially dangerous, this kind of arcangleist system. So c3 and both sides castle, d6, h3 avoiding any pin here, and after a6, I guess a lot of us might be in a routine mindset here about putting the bishop on c2, then playing in the centre later. But Magnus actually takes on c6 here, which might be just as good. So he's doubling black's pawns. Okay, black's got the bishop here. Rook e1, rook e8, now knight bd2, and we see black playing d5 now, and it seems an aggressive position for black to have. E takes d5, queen takes d5, and if black can get in e4 maybe at some point, maybe these bishops are opened up. If it can open up the centre, the bishops might be more effective. But knight b3 stops black for a moment by putting pressure on c5. That bishop now goes back to f8, which is interesting. Okay, and now we see c4, queen d6. Structurally, it looks as though this is quite ugly actually right now, this situation on the queen side. Bishop e3, as though actually maybe bishop c5 is quite handy here, or just knight c5 as well. So we see knight d7, which seems to hold the c5 square for a moment, and now d4 from Magnus. And there's a slight risk, I think, with this. This looks like with the knight driven back, you might imagine here that this pawn might be a prelude to some sort of attack. But for the moment this bishop is not doing much unless it can get back into the game later. But has black got the potential of a pawn roller, you might think? Well, we'll see now. Black actually plays here a5, and it will be annoying to have this knight driven back, so a4 seems to sort that out. And there's a target here, of course, on a5, a fixed target. But now f5, trying to get this pawn roller going, and intuitively it looks as though, well, with the knight driven back, has black got attacking prospects here? Even if he's going to lose a pawn on the queen side like this one later, potentially, has black got the attack? c5, which positionally this bishop is looking awkward at the moment. Okay, we see queen g6, and this looks again, potentially some nasty stuff. Potentially, knight c4. And the other thing about c5 though, okay, it seems okay, white's getting this a5 pawn, but what about this potentially huge knight which is being allowed on d5? Well, we see knight f6, and in this position there isn't the routine taking on a5. If that is indeed possible, we'll check in the second pass here. But the move Magnus plays in this position, this pawn is slightly vulnerable. Even if there's a knight on d5, in principle that pawn could be a vulnerability. We see actually bishop f4, which also helps white's control of e5 here for any future knight e5. So knight d5, and now just queen d2. So white's got this grip on the dark squares at the moment, which seems quite difficult to lift, and he's also simultaneously putting more pressure as well on a5 here. Okay, bishop e6, and now this pawn is taken with the b knight. It's interesting to see the difference on the c knight as well, maybe in the second pass. Rook. Now this pawn is also attacked now. Is black actually falling apart here? Rook eb8. Now if knight takes c6, I think that leaves that loose, so knight takes f4 looks pretty good to be on c4 knight. We see instead, we see knight e5 attacking the queen, queen f6, and now bishop h2, and this looks like black's in big trouble actually here if it doesn't do anything. It looks as though c6 is next. In fact, what can black do? What is he going to play? Rook a6? That doesn't look too convincing. So somehow black's been strangled already in this position, and what he tries now is to sort of emphasize his kingside attack. He plays actually rook takes a5, queen takes a5, and rook takes b2, and there's some imminent threats now that Magnus Carlsen faces. Principally, for example, e3, and on taking something like queen g5, just trying to coordinate, get pressure on g2 here. Okay, Magnus now challenges this rook. Get off my second rank, he says. Rook a2, staying on that second rank, and it's difficult to attack that rook there on a2. And now, looking at this game live yesterday, this was my game of great interest to have a look at live. Magnus had this opportunity, according to engines, just to go in for rook b8 here, with a potential follow-up later of queen a8, and later some weird stuff with queen a6 coming back to defend, putting pawns like this, queen h3, and it looked all pretty technical and worrisome. And generally as humans we don't like moving pawns around our king as well. So this is intriguing that Magnus's alternative kind of ticks all the human boxes actually, as well as parrying the attack here, because he plays actually queen a6, not just for the moment putting pressure it seems on c6, but really the key resource here for rook a2 to break this coordination potentially on g2 on any e3. So queen a6 avoids all the complications of rook b8, even though rook b8 might be potentially winning as well technically. So black tries his attacking card. It's difficult to see what black can do if he doesn't play e3 here. f4, maybe, you know, white can just take on e4 and not be too concerned. It's something to check in the second pass. What are the attacking options here for black? Knight c3, you might think. Isn't that just inviting, for example, rook b8? We'll try and check out the options here. But black goes all in for the attack. He's burning all his boats. He's playing e3 now to try and get coordination between rook and queen on the king. Hack attack time. F takes, now queen g5, so threatening mate on the spot. This is interrupted with rook e2. And then we see knight takes e3, which does protect the rook and put more pressure. It puts more pressure on g2. Okay, now here is a critical moment where maybe some of us would really blunder. I think I suspect that this would be a blunder to take on a2 here, and the engine analysis on site Chessbomb wasn't actually showing what black might be threatening potentially in this resulting position. If white immediately takes on a2, I suspect that knight takes g2 here. This didn't happen in the game, but it seems to give black annoying checks, and that's something to definitely check in the second pass. The queen on g5 basically is quite effective, I think, in conjunction with knight g2, I suspect anyway, but it's snuffed out. It's asked to it's kicked back with knight f3. Black can't sack the queen or anything here. He moves, I suspect black can't do anything too radical. He moves the queen back, blocked in by its own pawn. So that pawn on f5 is stopping both the bishop and the queen. No diagonals for either of them at the moment. The queen was better on g5. And also, of course, we've got this e-file as well, potentially. Now rook takes a2, and now rook b2. So knight g2 is utterly harmless here compared to that other variation. Utterly harmless. Now, if the bishop went back to, say, d5, that looks attractive. The bishop actually went back to c4. For the moment, though, if we just quickly check bishop d5, then white might have simply rook e2. So perhaps this explains Grischuk's next move, but I suspect he might have thought he's completely lost here, judging from some of the post-game comments. I think this looks pretty bad for black. The queen's attacked back. Does the queen want to go all in with queen c8 here? Well, Magnus actually plays queen a5. The queen is returning back to base with this move. I think it's pretty nifty, these queen moves that sort of attack over here and quickly come back over here. So bishop d5, immediate threat, taking a knight, but this is parried by a counter threat, queen e1. And it's pretty desperate, I think, here for black. All of a sudden. If the knight really is driven back, then white has a chance. Say knight c4, then maybe knight e5 first. Well, we'll check that out in the second pass. But black played f4. This is just taken. And actually knight c2. Okay, so there is a threat on the bishop here as well as the queen. Queen f2, which does actually attack the knight as well as defend f3. Bishop takes f3. Rook takes c2. Black, as well as the exchange down here, is faced with this menacing a pawn, and this bishop's not the most inspiring bishop on f8 in the world. And black resigned here. It seems that Grischuk was trying for an attack. It seemed like at one moment as though he had attacking prospects, but it seems that every single move Magnus played combined human kind of easy to playness with extinguishing all of black's counterplay without having to rely on pyrotechnic or technical type moves. It's made to look easy to extinguish this attack. Quite incredible. And I thought this would be a game worthy of a second pass at the time. Let's see some of the technical stuff behind the scenes. I think that was just quite an impressive game. I think you'll agree from Magnus how made to look quite easy. But you know, the positional concessions on the surface to some may have been horrific. You know, giving up the d5 square for that huge knight. So let's look again with some technical analysis. And okay, so let's go past the opening phase. Bishop takes c6. Well, just out of interest, bishop a4 20 times. Bishop takes c6 once in my reference database. So it seems bishop a4 is more standard. Maybe this is a little bit of a surprise move, but okay. My reference database isn't huge. d5, okay, so takes knight b3. First of all, is e4 actually stopped here? I think is this a really bad move? White can just take, and if takes, can take on c5 here, and now queen d4 with a good position. Okay, so that's no big deal to play e4. Bishop went back. If it goes back to a7, out of interest, actually that might be a viable move here. Going back to a7 doesn't seem too much wrong with it at this moment. Bishop g5, different sort of game. d4. The problem is the bishop could be shut down like this in any case. There's a pin here, so bishop f4 attacking c7. Black might be okay, but the bishop does look potentially shut down. Okay, so in the game we saw bishop f8, c4, queen went to d6, bishop e3. For the moment, you know, Magnus' advantage technically at this depth seems absolutely minuscule from this position at the moment. But there's a certain Magnus flavour to the position because he's got a structural he's got the structural advantage. Is it the case that engines are sometimes overestimating the bishop pair or something? So we see knight d7 and now d4. Okay, e4. Knight goes back. a5. a4. Queen g6 is mentioned as slightly promising for black here. It's sort of f5. What would black actually be threatening though? Knight f6, knight b6, with the idea of bishop b4. This is an alternative plan altogether. Maybe f5 is a little bit committal, a bit more committal than queen g6. Could this be a source of concern to play f5 here? Let's just quickly look at queen g6 here out of interest. Let's say bishop f4, bishop d6. A completely different sort of game without that pawn on f5. I think the chief advantage of not having the pawn on f5 is that this bishop could actually be useful later for eyeing h3. And even if queen g4, f5 now. Okay, and it might be an improved version of the game actually. So I'm not sure, and I think the engines think this is slightly suspect in some way. So white's trying to get a grip on the dark squares and stop black's pawn mobility. So c5 gets the queen away from supporting f4, but it does concede this big d5 square, but it does tie in that bishop, and it does kind of dislocate black for a5 being a terrible fixed weakness later. Queen g6, and we see knight c4.
knight f6, trying to get that big knight to d5. Now, why, for example, the pawn, could it have been taken here even? Knight d5 and black is threatening. Surely f4 is a big threat here. So queen d2, trying to get the grip on the dark squares. Bishop e7, let's go with bishop e7, b4. Let's go with bishop d7, knight e5. Again, the attack doesn't seem entirely convincing, but this seems to be it still seems black is positionally being strangled a little bit. Okay, I mean, if there's no pawn mobility of these pawns, then these pawns are kind of not entirely brilliant. Okay, white's slightly better. It seems the game continuation was much better than how Magnus played it. Bishop f4. He's keeping this bishop eyeing c7, even though the knight's coming to d5. It's that iron grip on the dark squares which is of great interest here. Queen d2, bishop e6, and now the pawn is taken. Now this move, rook eb8, I think black is hurting in this position already, and this probably doesn't help the position. Rook eb8. I think Grischuk was actually getting shorter and shorter of time. Magnus was playing moves quite quickly as well. If we examine knight takes f4 for a moment, does that offer black any kind of hope? With this bishop on f8, it's not really an inspired position unless g5 is on the cards at some point. I'm not sure what the follow-up is though. So that's protecting that pawn. c7 is now maybe for the taking. Well, that's a different game, and black's better than the game continuation. It's easy to be better than the game continuation. It seems okay. One of the rooks is trying to join the queen for an attack on g2 via this e3 here with rook eb8 basically. Magnus avoids losing a piece. This does lose a piece, I guess. So knight takes f4. And even this, I thought Grischuk was joking. He said, well, if Magnus lost the piece, then I'll be able to try something. This is a way of losing a piece, and it still seems that white's better, even after losing a piece here. Well, for the rook, two pieces for the rook. It's still white's better here, technically. Okay, so even that continuation now, but knight e5, okay, is avoiding maybe a lot of technical issues. And look at white's evaluation after queen f6. Was that a blunder of queen e8? Is this an improvement on the game? It's just hard to see with this bishop on f8 for the moment how black's pieces are coming to life. But it does seem technically to be an improvement on the game. So when the queen came to f6 here, okay, why is this a big problem? Bishop just goes back to h2, and white is threatening just knight a takes c6 or knight e takes c6. Okay, so the exchange sack is out of, it seems, desperation. It seems that this attack is extinguishable. Now rook b8 is cried out from an engine point of view. I think engines were liking rook b8 here. Let's have a quick look at this and some of the dangers. So say e3 takes queen g5. White would have to, play this sort of thing. Magnus has avoided all of this, and if knight takes e3 here, right, now there's some technical moves for white. Technical blows. Check. Check. Oh, check, check, h4. So the queen can't go onto the light squares here. White is better, and you can evict this rook or kick the rook. Okay, it's just look at this position though, blocking an own bishop, moving pawns around the king. It's not the sort of thing humans like. Rook takes b4 c6. The way Magnus played it is just so simple by comparison. Instead of going in for rook b8, he's always giving himself this resource rook e2 here to just stop the impact of this rook on the 7th rank. So maybe there's a big lesson in counterplay removal here. Move queen a6. If we just look at queen a6, it's not even mentioned third here, not even mentioned fourth. I've got 5 candidate moves and I can't see queen a6. I think it was briefly mentioned. Oh, now it's rising to the top with greater depth. It's risen to one of the top moves in the position at depth 16. I think Magnus is just as good as an engine. Anything below depth 16 then on Houdini, on brief analysis, is not as good as Magnus Carlsen, which I guess we should expect. So queen a6 is a beautiful move against e3 and queen g5. It seems rook b8 requires more technical expertise, more accuracy is required with rook b8 on the follow-up, and it looks like an ugly follow-up, moving, intuitively moving pawns around the king. So queen a6, e3 is tried. What else? Okay, let's try knight c3. Keeping an eye on e2, so queen g5. What is going on with queen g5 here? Takes, queen d2, rook f1, queen takes c6. Magnus can afford, of course, to give back the exchange, and if he has this position, then what can he play here for an advantage? Bishop f4. Okay, let's go with bishop f4. That gives us a resource like bishop e3 potentially. Knight d7 and the threat just taking, and queen takes c7, and this will be better for white as well. But e3 looks like, so in this position after queen a6, knight c3 looks like an interesting shot. There's also now mentioned f4. If we look at f4 here, we just take, this runs into bishop f5 it seems, but no, now counter exchange sack again, rook takes f4. And okay, what's wrong with bishop takes b1 here? Queen c4 check, followed by knight f7 check. So that's not actually possible here. Bishop e4, attacking the bishop on f4, that can just drop back, and there doesn't seem to be much happening here either. So basically, after this queen a6, if knight c3 doesn't do much, or f4 doesn't do much, it doesn't seem as though there's too many alternatives. Rook d2, just take on c6. It looks like black's running out of attacking oomph. So he plays e3, so that's the move played, e3. Inviting temporary coordination, okay, queen g5, but now breaking that rook on the 7th with rook e2. Okay, now here, rook takes e2, queen takes, knight c3. Magnus will just give, is he giving back the exchange, or is he interposing bishop f4 here? Bishop f4, queen d8. The stronger way not to lose e3 is knight f3. And if queen h6, then bishop f4. The queen goes back now, then we take on b1. We've got the outside passed pawn. It looks huge position for white. Blocked in bishop. Pressure on c7. Absolutely beautiful. So, okay, so in this position, rook takes e2, queen takes e2, is not particularly hot for knight c3 here because of queen d3. So yeah, Magnus can afford to give back the exchange if needed. That's another tool to reduce the counterplay. Okay, so the way black played it, knight takes e3. Knight f3 is a crushing move, which the engines really like. So let's see this continuation. Rook takes a2, takes. This isn't as good. I think here there might be. No. Forget what I said about knight takes g2. I'm not sure this is the point. Bishop d5. Okay, so knight takes g2. Actually, black is running out of checks. Knight g4 tactical move. Black's running out of checks. That's not the point. It's not entirely the point. The point here, bishop d5 might offer black some glimmer of hope. And how do we defend g2? This looks a little bit nasty for g2 dropping off. So why is the game, the knight f3, such a vast improvement on before? So this is the sort of position which would give black a glimmer of hope. So Magnus, he seems to have avoided all of this by not taking the rook immediately, by playing knight f3. Okay, so the queen goes back to g6, and now after taking here, can we not say the same thing about bishop d5? Well, the knight's shielding g2 here. That's the key point. Surely that the knight is in the way of g2, and black can just very safely play queen e2 here, it seems. Okay, if the knight goes here, rook b8, and now we're threatening, for example, queen e8, I think is a major threat, or queen e7. Queen e7, or bishop takes c7 for bishop d6 potentially. And here, white seems very safe here. So this knight f3 shielded g2 very nicely when it was played. Okay, so let's go back. So knight f3, now rook b2 here, bishop c4 was played. Queen c8 is the engine choice here at this depth, for queen a8. This looks good for white as well. Queen a5 is mentioned as the third candidate here, down here. Okay, now bishop d5, and we see queen e1, just attacking that knight in return for bishop takes f3. So black's attack's gone, it seems. If knight c4, now knight e5, it's possible as well rook f2. White's in control, the exchange up. There's nothing, the attack's gone. Okay, so f4 looks pretty desperate. Takes knight c2, and queen f2 is one of the best moves. And after bishop takes f3, well, queen takes c2 is also, it seems, possible here. I think Grischuk was very short of time as well, so he resigned here. So it makes it look really easy. I don't know how many grandmasters would have extinguished the counterplay with such elegance here, without needing to move pawns around the king, without any technical excursions. Just within the variations, there are ideas of giving the exchange back. Within many of the variations, always this a pawn is a danger, lurking if white did give the exchange back at some point. So the attack was made to look ineffectual, and the counterplay was squashed. All the cheapos removed. Great stuff. I think the king fundamentally wasn't that unsafe here, and black was playing like a piece down without this attacking bishop on f8. But at least, you know, Grischuk gave it a shot with the exchange sack. But okay, let's go on to the next game. I mean, that was a very exciting game. So now Gelfand against Ivanchuk. So they're both probably not feeling too great at the moment in this tournament. They're playing each other now. So after the rest day, so what happened? So we see Vasily playing black. He plays the Chigorin defence, which once Britain's Nigel Short beat Garry Kasparov in a televised 30-minute match with Chigorin. Really fantastic game, but it was only a rapid game. But let's see, the Chigorin here, black's voluntarily giving up bishop for knight, and this often exerts more influence on dark squares to do this kind of exchange. And then we see the other bishop being offered up. So Chigorin was kind of a rule breaker, trying to sort of show that the exceptions are showing the great beauty of chess, that the vastness of the game, that it can't be simplified to kind of axiomatic rules. And here it seems strange to want to give up both bishops, but the knights can sometimes revel in the resulting positions. So knight d5, bishop g3, h5. If white wants to castle kingside, it doesn't look too appetizing right now, and there's a horrible prospect of trebled pawns if white castles here with h4 and knight takes f4. So the bishop is given a spot on h2 against h4. Queen d7. Now both sides castle queenside. Knight e4, and it seems here white looks to be okay. By castling queenside in this position, the pawn on h5 doesn't look so menacing. White might enjoy the c5 square later, for example, and might enjoy playing moves like this on that c file, and it's black's the c file pressure against black here might be unpleasant. So black plays king b8, king b1, h4, the bishop tucks on h2. Now bishop d6, again offering the knight to take the bishop here, but it would sort out the c5 square. Now this is, for me, one of the strangest moves of this game. That white played actually f4. So he's blocking in for a moment his own bishop. So this must require some very deep judgment, or very specific attention to the nuances of the position to do this. So f4, I guess, is asking black, you know, if your break e5 is taken out of the equation, then what are you going to do? You can't intensify the pressure on my dark squares. Maybe it's kind of that sort of thing. In preparation, actually, for last night's radio show, the Tal radio show, f4 in the Tal-Botvinnik match of 1960 was given by Tal as anti-positional in some respects, as claimed, but it did give a bind on the e5 square, and Tal went on to win a classic game. Unfortunately, I had technical issues last night, I couldn't do the show, but there was a great deal in Tal's book. He talks about this f4 move in a different position, but here it does seem to bind black. So even if it looks dreadfully anti-positional here, at least there's a binding implication. And black's without breaks, immediate breaks. And if black, you know, plays for f6, what is he going to do? He can't play for e5 with this bishop eyeing d5 for the moment. He's going to have to waste more time. So keeping this bind is obviously a priority of f4. Forget the bishop, it's outweighed by the bind. And we see f5, which underlines the bishop's shut in, and it just looks a little bit strange. Knight g5 though. Okay, the knight might have prospects later to come back, or just keep an eye on f7 for the moment, tying down the queen. Knight a5, bishop goes back to e2, rook c8, and this looks as though, well, at least c5 looks quite dangerous. Queen d2 attacking the knight, bishop b4, queen d3, and now c5. And I found it surprising, looking at this game earlier and then coming back a bit later, how EventDate had managed to double rooks. And we see here that black is now potentially doubling rooks. So white's rooks look a little bit more passive, as well as this bishop looking a little bit silly. But now e4, okay, and this looks, if takes, well, f5 check, this bishop's going to come to life. Is pretty nasty potentially. So I think that bishop needs to be kept hemmed in by its own pawn on f4. So here actually, Vasily plays rook h c8. Wow, what is going on here, you might ask? And I think this is definitely for the second pass to explain exactly what is going on here in this position. After e takes d5, I think obviously something horrible is going on for white. So actually white played rook c1 here, and again this knight on d5 is just kept there with knight c4. Okay, technical analysis in second pass. I think white just sacrifices the exchange now, and then so he takes two pieces, basically giving up the rook for two pieces. Queen b3 attacking the rook. Now queen c6, which offers a double attack opportunity if that is taken, and he's threatening also mating white with rook c1 here. So this looks quite a dangerous position. We need to go into the ramifications of taking knight on two moves there at least. So, but here this looks pretty dangerous as well. But now actually Boris just takes. He does take on c4 for this move, queen f3, saving the rook on h1. Queen b5, which introduces c3 as a menacing threat. Queen e2 prevents c3. Rook e8 kicking the queen. And now c3 is played here. And now this will be pretty nasty as well, because there's also rook e2 introduced now. So if b3, that looks as though rook e2 is really nasty in this position. Okay, so white actually in this position plays another slightly surprising defensive move, getting rid of black's attacking unit, this pawn. He just takes it off here, inviting the discovered to check. Queen b3, and now we have, with black material down, a piece down, even though this bishop looks remarkably silly, black goes for the perpetual here. Okay, so it was a very interesting game, and there's some second pass moments there to clarify technically what is going on there, but here white can't escape the perpetual. So let's check this out in second pass technical analysis. So let's go to, I think, the critical position here, one of the more critical positions, and just have a look what was going on there. Okay, so white was actually technically slightly better here. Bishop d6 is one of the better moves from an engine point of view. Even if black had double pawns, by the way, I don't think that's a big deal. So say white takes here and takes on d5, say. Black's actually doing quite well, apparently, in this position. I think, okay, black's got knight a5 to look forward to in rook c8, and this knight could be celebrating c4, basically. So this is not too desirable, taking on d6. So we see the move f4, and I thought that was surprising. The engine's mentioning f4. Yes, it does mention f4 as like third possibility down, fourth possibility at this depth. f4 is mentioned. What is actually black threatening? Taking a knight b6 or knight db4. Okay, so it avoids the exchange of bishops as well. And we see f5, knight g5, knight a5, bishop goes back, rook c8, queen attacks the knight, bishop b4, queen d3. Again, white technically seems slightly better from an engine perspective. So we see this c5, and this looks like an outright blunder here initially, to play c5. Okay, I think because of this potential liberation of the bishop, the engine doesn't like this move, but now it's calmed down about it. So it's probably seeing this tactic that EventDate has seen here to make this possible in this position, that e4 isn't so devastating. So what on earth is this about? So e4. If the knight moved back, then black's crumbling. I think just taking and taking on e6. If we move the knight back, it's a disaster, isn't it? We just take. Well, the rook's behind it. We're just losing a piece straight off the bat. Okay. So that knight can't move anyway, and if taking like this, either check king moves. Knight takes e4 attacking the rook, and f takes is pretty nasty as well. So f takes will be winning the piece if the rook steps back. If rook c4, it looks as though this knight's too fragile on d5. So EventDate, he played the only move, it seems, rook hc8 here. This is the only move. So what is going on here after e takes d5? Let's have a look. Apparently it's rook takes d5. Okay, then we got that in. Rook takes d5. And what's the idea? I suspect it's to do with this bishop on h2 at the back of this. Rook takes d1. Whoa! No way! What? What? Queen takes d1 check here. This is a puzzle position. Knight c4 threats of knight d2 check is menacing. Wow. Really? So I think b3 is not so hot. Blimey, is this really the intention after this knight sack? Now I'm glad I reserved this for the second pass. It's good to be honest when one doesn't have a clue. So e takes d5, rook takes d5. Now if queen e3, let's imagine queen e3. That's a target surely for knight c4. So if bishop takes, we have rook takes d1 check. if rook takes, we have queen takes d5 attacking the rook and the queen. If queen f3 here, this is asking for knight d2 check. White's getting crushed here actually in this position. Look at this knight d2, the power of this knight d2. Or is it something else? Bishop e1 for knight e2, even better for the back row. So white could potentially be getting mashed here. Wow. It's difficult to defend. If queen c2, knight a3, what is there to defend? So these kind of implications, let's have a look at this again. So rook c1 was calmly played. So if e takes d5, rook d5. Funny enough, the queen hasn't got too many squares in this position. If you look at this position, how many squares has the queen got? It's got, I suppose it's got b5 technically, because of this pin. This would leave black better, this position, much better. So it's only got, she's only got e3 and f3. So e3 runs into knight c4s, and queen f3 runs into this spectacular. I didn't know this was behind the scenes, mind you. Okay, so pardon me. So queen f3, pardon me, rook takes d1, rook takes d1. Anything else is terrible apart from queen takes d1 check here. So it's this power of knight c4 is revealed. White's a queen up here, but faced with this knight d2 check now. Wow. If queen e2, for example, knight d2 check, the queen has to take. Otherwise he's getting back row mated now. And in this position, bishop c2. Okay, technically white's got a minuscule advantage now, but this bishop doesn't inspire confidence. e5 against the knight. It's crazy. What a crazy continuation on this e takes d5. So rook c1, just bypassing all of the fireworks there, and trying to secure control of c4 against this knight c4 is important, apparently. Okay, so that's just bypassing, and also he's trying to keep this this threat of his own to liberate the bishop, keeping the tension there. Black's best move here is knight c4, it seems. Okay, so again, in this position, if e takes d5 here, whoa, check. Oh, c1 is loose. White has to lose the queen here. It's just simply no good because of the back row. If queen takes d2, that doesn't inspire confidence. So that can't be taken there. That's much more clear cut. Can't be taken there. But the earlier one wasn't so clear cut. So white plays rook takes c4. E takes, and black is actually technically better here. He played though e takes d5. The engine's crying out for rook c2 in this position, which introduces which threat? Rook d2 as a threat, or queen c7. So if a3, rook d2, queen b5, queen takes, e takes, bishop d1, protecting c2, bishop c5. What a mess. But black might be technically better. This bishop might have some opportunity later on this other diagonal. Okay, so in the game we saw e takes d5, And actually this looks like a blunder from an engine point of view. Actually, rook c2 is much preferred. So e takes d5, queen b3, and it looks as though white's okay now. He's stopping rook c2 because of queen takes b4, surely. Bishop d3 first. It's not that hot anyway. So queen c6, threatening rook c1. So that's taken off, and now we reach this position, which is 0, 0, 0. c3. Well, that's one of the safer options to just take care going into the perpetual. Wow, some interesting stuff behind the scenes there in this game, in this draw. Okay, interesting. Let's go on to the next one. So Rajabov against Kramnik, d4 from Rajabov. Vladimir plays into a Nimzo engine defense. We have Rubinstein variation. d5, okay, knight f3. Vladimir Kramnik takes on c4 and plays c5. We have a standard isolated queen's pawn position, with black now playing b6, queen e2, bishop b7, bishop g5. Black is now voluntarily giving up the bishop to intensify the light square strategy, giving up the bishop for knight. It's a common used method, it seems, in a lot of games, giving up this bishop for knight as a sort of campaign on the colour complex on the light squares here. Of course, these pawns, if they're going to be hanging pawns soon, once black encourages c4 from white, we'll end up with hanging pawns as well. So queen c7, bishop moves back. Now in this setup, it's not just controlling light squares. This bishop really is eyeing this defensive piece, and some kind of cheapo possibilities exist. Knight g4 is now threatening the cheapo bishop f3 and queen takes h2, mate. Okay, that's parried, but at the cost of white giving up what normally one consider an attacking piece against black's king. So white is now left with a seemingly not too inspired position here, with these pawn weaknesses for Vladimir to kind of pressurize. So he's got the hanging pawns. Okay, and now queen b7, nifty move, not only across the center, but queen a6 will double attack two of white's weak pawns when it arrives, and it arrives here. Okay, queen a2, but white's position is not too bad, even though black seems to have a pleasant time of things at the moment. Rook c6, queen b3. Black is pleasantly trebling the pressure on c4, but white has now bishop takes f6 and knight e5 protecting c4. Rook d6, rook ed1, rook cd8, now torturing d4. Okay, it looks potentially unpleasant. This queen seems quite nastily parked, just eyeing these weaknesses. So what does white do about d4? This looks like quite a clever move. Queen b4. Can Vladimir afford to allow an infiltration with queen e7 here, which would justify this knight f7 being vulnerable? That might be the reason why rook takes d4 wasn't used here. We see instead queen c8. Now knight f3 protecting d4. So white's managed to hold on to all his pawns and might be threatening to dissolve the a pawn with a5 here, potentially. For example, knight e4. Okay. What now is going on with knight e4? White plays the strange looking h4 in this position. I think what we need to do in the second pass is establish what the threats are with knight e4. Possibly black might have been intending, Vladimir might have been intending to use the queen of an attack with e5 and something else going on after that. So h4 looks a little bit odd. Okay, and the knight just goes back, and now we see a5 trying to dissolve that a pawn weakness. Now knight g4 again. AB, rook e1, rook c6, queen b5, queen c7. I mean, h4 did ask for a big weakness on g4, and I was slightly surprised to see this weakness at some point in the live stream yesterday. Why did white weaken g4 like that? And it seems, you know, Vladimir, again, he has a comfortable position here, very comfortable position. And then we see a tactical move, rook d5, using that pin. And the rook can install itself rather aggressively soon, which it does now, with rook f5, seemingly threatening rook takes f3 and queen h2 all the time. White's not too bothered though, plays queen d3, probably doesn't do much at the moment. Maybe just g takes. No, that does get mated with queen h2 and queen f2 mating. So I assume that this king chase is harmless. If this was played, which it wasn't, this must be mostly harmless. And the rook's hanging as well here, as well as the queen, so it's actually losing for black. So forget that. So that's just there on the cards. g6 is played. Rook c2, queen d6, rook d1, rook c8, queen e2, rook d8, rook cd2, queen c6. Okay, so what is going on here? Both sides seem to be shuffling here. Now the rook goes to a5, okay. Queen e4, rook f5, that's shuffling. Knight f6, queen e3, knight g4, queen e4, knight f6, queen e3, knight g4, draw. Oh dear. Alright. Okay, it looks on the surface that was a bit of a strange game. What is interesting to consider is the reason behind h4. It looks like a kind of anti-positional move. Let's check that out in particular from this game. Okay, it looks like a pleasant, after giving up this bishop for knight, that he had a pleasant position. So the hanging pawns kind of tortured via this queen a6 route soon, and the isolated a pawn. So c4 and a4, but white held the balance resourcefully soon by taking knight e5. And now here the resourceful move queen b4, which is mentioned by the engines. So let's have a look at this one for a start. Rook takes d4, queen e7 is the move. Of taking here, check, and we've got a perpetual check scenario. So the knight on e5 guarantees perpetual check. So okay, that's one thing. And let's go on later to see what on earth black was threatening here after knight e4. Was it potentially knight c5 or something? Let's see. This is it. It's revealed. It's revealed. Knight g5. Knight e4 has knight g5. Of course. Of course. It's undermining d4. If black can achieve knight g5, then d4 is weaker. So it's still about d4. It's not about it seems anything else in particular. Knight g5 needs to be stopped. And this sets the scene for the game, that g4 is weakened because white has to play h4. Black does have the rook kind of coordination advantage, that the rooks are doubled on d4. So in the light of the knight g5 threat, the engine is still not... Okay, now it is at depth 17. h4. h4. Top move to remain equal. Ingenious. So this knight e4 has provoked the g4 weakness. So the knight has done its job and now wants to use g4. It makes sense. White wants to dissolve the a pawn. The knight installs itself on g4 in the meantime. So white dissolves at least one of his structural weaknesses. Okay, and we see virtually equal position. This is no big deal, apparently. Second technical moment here. There's no big deal. There's no actual threats here. I think this was sufficient. What I mentioned earlier, that rook takes f3 just is bad. Surely. Check. Okay, black's best here is actually queen takes h4, not this losing move. That's just losing because of the rook. Let's just check that out. Actually, f2 there. White's running away. If queen takes h4, that's not too hot. Surely, king e2 and white's technically better. There's no major attack going on here. Okay, so in this position, g6 was played, and again, it's just nothing's going on now. It seems Vladimir's just doing some probing moves all the time. g3, another pawn move, but not a major concession, it seems. Okay, so h4 was just for me the main mystery there on that first pass. Okay, an interesting game, and white held balance very resourcefully. It looks as though at some point it was getting a little bit uncomfortable. That queen b4 move, just for the infiltration e7, just held balance against the weakened d4, and then later when the d4 pawn after knight e4 was threatened again with dear life with knight g5, move h4 saved white again. So white was really resourceful in keeping his pawns in the centre. Okay, an interesting round, not as interesting as round 3 in my view. The Magnus Carlsen game stands out clearly as the game of the round. Hope you got something from this commentary. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.